you. I have good news from Washington. You don't often get good news from Washington, but we voted to repeal Obamacare. Like anything else in Washington, it's sort of a good news, bad news thing. Now, the good news is we did vote to repeal it. We'll go to the president's desk. The bad news is we still have President Obama as the president, and he's going to veto. We had an interesting debate. When we do budgetary debates, and this was part of what they call budget reconciliation, we got rid of Obamacare. We're allowed to introduce unlimited amendments, and usually the amendments are very limited. So I got two amendments that I got to vote on yesterday. The first amendment said that we ought to just be careful on who comes to our country. You see the Paris tragedy, you see these things going on. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars to defend the country. Well, don't you think we ought to be careful on who actually comes to visit, or who actually comes to study, or who actually comes to live here? And this is one of the greatest concerns, really, if you want to protect the country, we have to know about. Should there be some rules on who gets to come here? I think absolutely. To have a wide open border with no rules, I think is a mistake. There are about 34 countries that have significant radical jihadist movements. These are like where they're training wearing black masks and wanting to come over here. So when someone wants to immigrate from those countries, I would think that we need to know who they are. We have in our country 11 million people who came here illegally, and they say 40% of the 11 million have overstayed their visa. So they came here illegally, but then they overstayed their visa and haven't gone back home. Well, if you're breaking the law, we need to know who you are and apply the law. But if we don't know who's here among the 11 million, there's 150,000 students who are here from the Middle East, and we don't know if 40% of them have overstayed their visa. Is that potentially a problem? Well, maybe. The attacker, or a couple of the attackers from 9/11 were here on student visas, just weren't going to school. Well, we have rules. We're the party of the rule of law. You have to obey the law. If you don't obey the law, you ought to be sent back. But I think until we get a better handle on it, I think we ought to just stop it for now. Stop it from about 30 countries and just say, the thing is no one has a right to be here. Sure, we are a welcoming country, but no one has a right to come here. We should just stop it for a while. Let's reassess and find out if there are any problems. We also need to be concerned even about our allies and our friends. We need to have some rules in place. France, Germany, England, all our friends, we do want them to visit. We want to trade with them. We want to have interaction with them. But right now, they don't have to have any kind of visa to come see us. It's called a visa waiver nation. So what I advocated was that instead of coming here with no visa, that you would come here through global entry. Global entry is like the frequent flyer program. You see the frequent flyer program we have? I wish we didn't have any of it, but if we want to have some kind of degree of safety, it's a background check, and then you go through the airport easier. If you're not in it, you ought to get in it because it makes your life a lot less bad as far as going to the airports. That's what global entry is for international travelers. I see no reason why people coming from France, they shouldn't go through global entry. It's a pain, but the thing is, if we don't do it, then how else are we going to defend ourselves? People say, we'll just go kill them all. Well, we've tried that. There's billions and billions of people. You're going to go kill every person? We have to defend who comes to our country. And the thing is I think this is an important way, part of how we defend ourselves. So I introduced an amendment, but we got a few people for it, a few people against it, but primarily our biggest problem is Marco Rubio's on the other side of this issue. And he hasn't been willing to defend the border. And this is a big contrast. Not only does it contrast with his inability to want to defend the border, but then he also wants to topple regimes around the world, which I don't think makes us safer also. So, for example, Libya. They had a guy named Gaddafi, and he ran the country. He was not somebody we would vote for, was not somebody we would invite to dinner, but at the same time, he was not spreading radical Islam throughout the world. We toppled him at the bequest of Hillary Clinton and Marco Rubio, and many others, but those two primarily. And when they toppled Gaddafi, what happened? We got chaos. Now a third of Libya says that they're pledging allegiance to ISIS. They call Libya a failed state. So my question is it a good idea to topple a regime, to have regime change? Do we have the ability to create nations out of nothing? Can we just make them like us, or make them become like us by toppling these dictators? It just doesn't work. But that's a real question. Many of the people, Rubio, Clinton, they want to topple them, then they don't want to do anything to protect on who's coming to visit us. The other thing is in toppling this regime, what do? You create hundreds of thousands of refugees. And we're a very welcoming nation. My church, we helped bring a family here from Bosnia during the crisis there. But at the same time, we do have to be aware that some people come here even as refugees and want to attack us. The Boston bombers were here under asylum, and yet they wanted to attack us and did attack us. In my town, Bowling Green, Kentucky, we had 2 Iraqi refugees. They came in here under the refugee program, and President Obama says, well, refugees are not a risk for our country. Well, these 2 were. They tried to buy Stinger missiles to attack us. They've got them on videotape in a locker holding up weapons that they were buying to try to attack us. I think we need to know who's coming. We have to have some rules on who comes to our country. It turns out that these Iraqi refugees, one of them had fingerprints that were on a bomb fragment. He was already in the database. They just didn't check that. They didn't do a thorough job. They didn't check the database. And so we can't just say everybody can come. I'm for a lot of people coming. I'm for immigration. I'm not against immigrants. My family were immigrants. But at the same time, there are polls that say if anybody can come, 700 million people would come. Well, we're a country of 300 million. We can't just become a country of 700 million new people all at once. There have to be some rules for national security as well as just being a country. When we look at what goes on and when we look at the vote the other night, repealing Obamacare was great. It'll be sort of a Pyrrhic victory. We won't really get a real victory out of this. One of the other amendments that I put forward was on concealed carry. And there was a quote by the D.C. police chief. And if you know anything about the District of Columbia, it's the most anti-gun owning place in the whole country. They're terrible. In fact, the Supreme Court had to strike down one of their gun laws. And so the D.C. police chief said about a week ago, and this was an extraordinary thing for a police chief to say, but I agree with it. She said, if you see an armed shooter, take them down. This was to the general public. And I said, well, wow, that's something for the police chief to say this. And I said, that would be great if you only were allowed to own a gun to take down the assailant, or if you're only allowed to carry the gun to take down an assailant. So it's hard to have a gun in D.C., much less have one on you that you can take down an armed assailant. So I introduced a bill, and this always makes people really mad, that politicians in D.C. I introduced a bill to allow for a concealed carry program in D.C. and to allow for reciprocity. I've had friends drive up from Kentucky where we have concealed carry, but then what do? They've got a gun in their car. Once they drive into D.C., they could go to jail. In fact, there was a veteran, this was about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a blizzard in D.C., and he was having bad dreams. He called a helpline. And they came to his door, and then for some reason they decided to break down his door. They broke down his door, and then when they found him, he wasn't doing anything with his guns, but he did have some guns in the apartment, and they weren't appropriately registered. So he called for help, and what they do? They arrested him. So they took him to prison, and then the snowstorm was coming down. They lost him. His family didn't know where he was. Nobody knew where he was. He was never booked. He was put like in a holding cell somewhere. He spent 17 days in prison, and his family didn't know where he was. They thought he had been killed or kidnapped, all because his guns weren't properly registered. So anyway, we won the gun vote for, once again, sort of a Pyrrhic victory. We had 54 votes, 53 Republicans and 1 Democrat. It kind of shows you how the party breakdown is anymore. And then 46 Democrats voted against us. But, like a lot of things in the Senate, you have to get 60 votes, so we didn't quite get there. The other big vote we've had in the last couple of weeks is even more important than the Obamacare vote, frankly. This was a vote on raising the debt ceiling. People will say, oh, well, you've already spent the money. Well, they're not really, I guess this may surprise you, but President Obama is not being completely honest with you. You don't really have to raise the debt ceiling. They say, oh, we'll default on our debt. We bring in about $250 billion a month into government. You know how much your interest payment is? Somewhere between 30 and 60, maybe 70 billion a month. So you bring in 250 and your interest payment is 30 to 60 or whatever, you've always got enough money to pay for it. And you don't have enough money to pay for everything, that's why we run a deficit. But let's say you did not raise the debt ceiling, what would happen? Well, I have a bill to tell them what they should do. Don't raise the debt ceiling, pay the interest first, pay Medicare and Social Security second, pay your soldiers' salaries third, and take care of your veterans. And you know what? That'd be about all there is. There's no money for about anything else. So everything else that's fluff that your government does, maybe they just shouldn't be doing it. Maybe they should take care of the 4 or 5 items that we promise people we should take care of. And maybe the $15 million we spend on foreigners going to our schools we could cut out. We spend $15 million on foreign students coming to our community colleges. We spent last year $45 million developing a natural gas station for Afghanistan. Think about this. Very few people have cars in Afghanistan. How many people do you think how many of you have a natural gas car? One that runs on natural gas. Nobody has those in our country. Do you think anybody in Afghanistan has one? Why did we build a $45 million natural gas station? Because it's green, and the president's for green stuff. And the Democrats are for green stuff. They don't care what it costs. That came out of the defense budget. $45 million for a natural gas station. It'll probably be taken away. I'll bet you within a year they're robbing it for parts. You know, they build stuff and then someone's ripping the copper tubing out and selling the copper tubing. That's probably what happens within a year. It probably will never be used. Nobody has a natural gas vehicle over there. So we have the vote on raising the debt ceiling. You'd say, well, how much are they going to raise the debt ceiling? Well, they decided to do it this way, unspecified. No dollar amount. They just said that President Obama can borrow as much as he needs, and the next president, till March of 2017. So there are no limitations on borrowing right now. Just we'll borrow as much as we need, much as can be spent. And you say, well, whose fault is it? Republicans or Democrats? Both. Absolutely. Both parties. In fact, that's one of the points of my candidacy. You say, why are you running? There's 10 other fairly conservative people running in the election. Not one of them would ever balance the budget. Because on the right, you have people who say, we want unlimited military spending. And on the left, you have people who want unlimited domestic welfare spending. So what happens? It's what I call the unholy alliance. They get together and they have a secret handshake. They won't tell me what the handshake is, but a secret handshake. And they raise both. So you've heard all the clamoring about the sequester. Everybody's like crazy. Oh my goodness, our country will not be able to defend ourselves because of the sequester. That's crazy. Do you know what the sequester was? The sequester was a slowdown in the rate of growth of spending. Spending for the military went up under the sequester. Gradually, and maybe a little slower than it would have not without the sequester. Spending for domestic welfare went up under the sequester. All they did was slow down the rate of growth. If you've ever seen it, on one of the news channels, they have a chart. And here's the spending without the sequester, and here's the spending with the sequester. There's almost no white space between the two lines. But it was a slowdown in the rate of growth. But what happened? The right, those who have never met a weapon system they don't want to build, and some of these weapon systems don't defend the country. You have to realize some of these weapon systems simply enrich the people who make the weapon system. But they've never met a weapon system they don't want. And so unlimited military spending, but they can't get what they want unless they get the left to agree with them. So the right wants to bust the caps, go above the spending levels. The left wants to bust the caps. So what do they do together? They get together. It's the unholy alliance, and they raise both. So it is truly a problem of both parties. And that's why we have to have somebody who will fix it. So you look at some of the proposals from the other candidates. Marco Rubio has asked for a $1 trillion increase in the military. And you might say, well, I served, and I think we need a strong national defense. So do I. I've got 6 or 7 members in the military that serve. I have 3 active duty now, 2 enlisted in the Navy, and 1 who's a pilot in the Navy. I care about defending our country. But I don't think that we become stronger through bankruptcy court. I don't think we project strength from bankruptcy court. I think we get weaker as we borrow more money. If you want to defend your country, spend the money that we have, not borrow it from China. To think we can get stronger from borrowing money from China to spend it on anything, even the military, makes no sense at all. But the spending, it continues to expand and expand and expand. And I don't think we're getting stronger. But in addition to what we spend, Rubio is saying he wants to spend $1 trillion more. Where's he going to get it from? Just means we're going to go further into debt. And you say, well, how much do we spend now? We spend about $600 billion on national defense. How does that compare to other countries? Well, let's see. You take Russia and add it to China, and then you add it to the next 8 countries, and then you equal what we spend. So I'm not saying we shouldn't spend money on national defense. I'm just saying let's put it in perspective what we spend now compared to other countries. We spend as much as the next 10 countries combined. That's not counting another $100 billion on things like the TSA and domestic screening and all this. That's why I say when you look at all the money we're spending on national defense, on homeland security, on the TSA and all this stuff, maybe we ought to just spend a little bit of money saying some people can't come over here to attack us. Maybe a little bit ought to be spent on securing our border and not saying we're going to have a wide open border for anybody to come here. People ask me, what's the worst thing that the president has done to our country? I say, well, how long do you have? But really, if I wanted to summarize it, I would say it's the collapse of the separation of powers. Our founding fathers, one of the great things they gave us was co-equal branches of government. That the House, the Congress, would be equal to the president. Not less, but equal. And we would check and balance each other. In fact, Madison put it this way. He said that we would pit ambition against ambition. The ambition of Congress to want more power against the ambition of the president to take more power. But you know what's happened? Not only with this president's made it a lot worse, but probably for the last 100 years, more power has been gravitating to the presidency. And if I were to estimate for you how powerful is the presidency, 1,000 times more powerful than Congress. All of the stuff that is being done to the economy in an injurious way, all of the injuries being flung at business, none of them coming from Congress. I've been there for 5 years. I haven't voted on anything that's been a significant regulation of the economy. Almost all of it's coming from President Obama's pen. Remember he said he had a pen and a phone, he was going to do what he wanted? That's what he's doing. This new Clean Power Act, you say, well, I'm for clean energy. I don't want the air to be dirty. So do I. But the question is the air cleaner now than it was in 1960 or dirtier? Without question, your air is cleaner now. And you hear all these people saying, well, it's the end of the world. The Statue of Liberty is going to drown, and the water is going to flood over the continent from all this greenhouse, from all this global warming. Don't get me started on this. But the thing is when you look at this and you look at this alarming stuff that's going on, we need to put it in perspective. The air is cleaner now than it was 30 years ago. If you compare the air now and your streams now to the way they were in 1910, gosh, we're 1,000 times better. Now, some of that is due to government regulation. We do have regulation on pollution. What we ought to do is make sure it's balanced, such that we don't go crazy on this stuff. We passed a new regulation called the Waters of the U.S. that says that 97% of the land in Iowa will be under the control of the federal government now. What happens if you don't obey the federal government? They'll put you in jail. You think I'm making this up? We have 48 federal agencies that are armed with SWAT teams, with automatic weapons. The USDA, and I'm not making this up, has a SWAT team. What do they use it for? Well, they had to go to an Amish farm over in Pennsylvania because the guy was illegally selling milk directly from the cow. They arrested him in a pre-dawn raid with the USDA SWAT team. They went to an organic food store outside of L.A., handcuffed everybody, took all the computer equipment because they were selling raw milk, unpasteurized milk. They went to Gibson Guitar, about an hour from where I live down in Nashville, because they accused Gibson Guitar of breaking a law written in India. We have something called the Lacey Act where you can go to prison for breaking not one of our laws, breaking a law in another country. We had a couple fishermen down in Florida, one of them got 8 years in prison, and they were accused of violating a Honduran fishing regulation. Not one of our laws at all. They 7% of their catch was not of the right size, and they put the catch in Ziploc baggies instead of cardboard. And that broke a Honduran fishing regulation. 8 years in jail. Wetlands violation. A guy was putting clean dirt on his own land in southern Mississippi, 10 years in prison. He was 70 years old. He spent the entire 10 years. You break a federal crime, you serve the entire time. His daughter was 43, had a 1-year-old child. She was given 84 months in prison and got out somehow after 26 months in prison. We've got plenty of bad people in our country, rapists and murderers and thugs that need to be in jail. Somebody putting dirt on their own land, or their daughter selling lots to the land that they put dirt on, shouldn't be going to jail.
Milk from the cow.
Or selling milk from the cow. I told that story to my father-in-law, and he said, well, I grew up drinking milk from the cow for 20 years. He said the only problem we ever had was when the cow got into the onions. But the bottom line I'd like to leave you with this, and we may have time for a couple of questions, is that my candidacy is about something different. My candidacy acknowledges that both parties are bankrupting us, and that if we don't do something different, if you say, oh, the Republicans are better, we're going to get a Republican nominee, and somehow we're going to balance the budget, it's never going to happen. Maybe they spend the money slightly less fast than the Democrats, but the bottom line, if we don't acknowledge that both sides have sacred cows, that if they're allowing too much money to be spent for, we're never going to get better. The other thing I'm offering that no other candidate is offering is, I don't think we need to be back in the Middle East. We need to protect ourselves. We can help. I told him, frankly, if you want your sons and daughters back in the Middle East, there'll always be a Bush or a Clinton. So I have a candidacy that is offering you something different. I hope you'll rally to it. I hope you'll caucus. I hope you'll get your friends. And talk about surprised. I think we can really surprise the pollsters if they wake up February 2nd and find out that, you know what, our strength was a lot greater than they had predicted. Thank you for coming.
You're a candidate that greatly believes in the control of eminent domain by the government. For 25 years, they've taken my land. The municipality that I lived in this county, we were the first farm that's ever been taken by eminent domain in Dallas County. It's gone on for years and years. They've taken my land. And just amazingly, when they put the new road in, they took 6 acres of my land, which was a sod field. They took $500,000 worth of dirt off of it. Can't raise sod anymore. And it got a big hole in it now. They took the barn. They took the water, even the water, the wells, the fences, everything else on it. Trees, 40 walnut trees that were 40 years old. And then they gave me $200,000 for it. Guess what? I knew from the time that they took it that they didn't need the land at all for the interchange that they put in, but they took it anyway for $200,000. Guess what? When they decided that they didn't need it anymore, I could buy it back. Guess how much I paid for it? For a big hole in the ground, $336,000, because I had 18 acres behind it that I couldn't get to. Had just a very little opening to my 18 acres. I paid that back.
Well,
We have got to find some way to control the taking by the government, because I just talked to the journalist over there who told me that there's 2 Dakotas, 1 Michigan, and 1 Florida state that has control of eminent domain. And when
eminent domain abuse is gone crazy, and this is exactly why people in Iowa need to know that Donald Trump is a great lover of eminent domain abuse. In fact, he uses it as a way to make money for himself. He evicted a woman who'd been in her house, I'm not talking about just land here, lived in her house for 30 years. Why? Because he wanted her property for a parking lot for limousines next to a casino. So we're not even talking about a public use here. And what I'll promise you, as a senator or as a president, is that I fight every day and will continue to fight that eminent domain never takes private property from a property owner and gives it to another property owner.
When are we going to get a vote on audit the Fed?
That's a good question. My staff, we have been bugging for 5 years. For the first 4 years, it was Harry Reid that had the power. Whoever's in leadership has enormous power, almost absolute power over what comes forward. So we bugged Harry Reid and bugged Harry Reid. In fact, we found old video of Harry Reid on the floor of the Senate saying he was for auditing the Fed. So we put it up on our Facebook. We sent it to his staff. We tried to remind him that he used to be for auditing the Fed, and we didn't get anywhere. Although he was pleasant, and I had pleasant conversations with him, I just never got anywhere. Now, we have Republican leadership for about a year, and I've been working very hard, and I talk to them on a daily basis. I was promised a vote this fall. My staff is talking to them as soon as recently as yesterday, and we don't have a vote scheduled, but we're still pushing. So I would recommend writing your senators' letters here, Ernst and Grassley. I can't remember if they're on the bill. They may both be on the bill, but write them letters encouraging them to let us have a vote, and I'm going to keep pushing for it. I was promised it this year, and so I'll be disappointed if I don't get it. I don't want to get your hopes too much up, though. The votes, as I count them, I have about 35 co-sponsors, all Republicans. I had one Democrat, and she's not on. She was on it last time, but is not on it this time. So we probably won't get to the low 40s. But the reason why it's important to have a vote, even when you lose sometimes, is that you have a vote, and then in the next election cycle, you try to get rid of the people who don't vote your interest. But you can only find that out if you put them on record and make them vote. So I'm going to keep trying to get on it to vote, and I think it's the first step, because the Federal Reserve is largely responsible for the cycles of the economy, for the booms, but also for the severe busts. And the people that end up getting hurt the worst, I think, are really the people with the least means to be able to protect themselves. Do one more.
All right. Joe, if it's going to be quick, it's going to be a tough one for you. I'm not sandbagging you, but this is going to... All your major economists in America, and I asked this of another candidate the other night, so I'm going to frame the question the exact same way I asked him. Most of your economists, led by Paul Krugman, which I know we don't love.
We don't mention his name.
You've
already messed up.
But the guy can count beans, okay? He's a good bean counter. But most of your economists are agreeing that 24 trillion is a magic number, and when we hit this number, our dollar's going to collapse, and it's all going to be over, and we're going to be Greece, Mexico, and the Weimar Republic all in one, and there's nobody to bail us out. If you were elected president, how do you plan on stopping that?
I don't know that anybody can predict exactly when it happens, but you're right. As president, we're going to start immediately and do something about it. What I would do is I would do something that's unheard of and it's really, really radical. All right?
Here it goes.
I would only spend what comes in. I wouldn't spend one more penny. And here's the way you might be able to do it, and it might end up involving a Supreme Court challenge. Back in the 70s, Nixon tried not spending money that was appropriated to him. And the Supreme Court said, no, you have to spend it. If Congress tells you have to spend it, you have to spend it. But here's my question. What if you're Congress and I'm the president, and you say, we want you to spend $1 million on X. And I say, okay, what if I can do it for $500,000? I spend $500,000, I do what you told me, but I spend less money. Mm-hmm. What would happen if the president just started spending less money? Did what he was told, or what she was told, as the activity, but did it for less money? I think it'd be an interesting lawsuit to see what the Supreme Court would say is, I obeyed the orders, I just found ways to save money.
Isn't that akin to a line item veto, which they, I believe they rejected?
It may well be, and I'm not saying that it definitely wins or not, but it would be an interesting way of doing it. There are things that the president can control. The president can eliminate regulations that have been put in place by executive order. The president can control, to a certain extent, federal employment and wages. Currently, federal workers make 1.5 times what private workers make. I think setting in line some of the salaries where they're in the same place, saying through attrition, as people retire from the federal government, we're just not going to replace them so the federal government can get smaller. There are certain things the president can do unilaterally on their own. The other thing is if a president were to win, if I were to win the election, what is winning are my ideas. You know, I'm for a much smaller government. I'm for a government that eliminates 5 departments, and I can name them. And so I'd be for a much smaller government. The president has a great deal of power, and so I think what I would attempt to do is
keeps it home.
I would try to spend only what comes in. Thanks for coming, guys.